Hi everyone, my name is Swish, and I'm excited today to be recording my very first Magic the Gathering online video for Legit Games. And I'm really excited to be playing not only my favorite format, but one of my favorite decks in Modern, and that is going to be 8-Whack. So 8-Whack has kind of a reputation in Modern for being an incredibly budget-friendly deck. And it is. It's very budget friendly. It's a very cheap deck to build, but it also has kind of a bad reputation for being a very linear deck, for being a deck that kind of newbies play. And I don't like that reputation. I think mono red decks actually have a lot of options in them that people don't realize, and there's a lot of thought process that goes into playing hyper aggressive red decks. Now, I started playing Magic the Gathering online after playing Paper Magic for a really long time. I have a lot of money invested in Paper Magic. And when I got into Magic the Gathering online, I didn't want to invest even more money on a digital version of the game. So I didn't want to spend a whole lot of money on it to start with. Like a lot of people, I picked up 8-Whack because it's budget friendly, and you're really not out anything if you buy it online and then decide you never want to play again. But I definitely wanted to play Modern, so 8-Whack was the deck that I decided to pick up. And the more I played this deck, the more I realized that you could actually invest some more money into it and make it a little bit more of a competitive version of the same deck. Give you some additional options in the sideboard and in the main deck. So just quickly kind of talking about what this deck is. If you're not familiar with 8-Whack, 8-Whack refers to the 8 copies of Goblin Bushwhacker and Reckless Bushwhacker. And really, it's almost like a 12-Whack when you think about it, because Goblin Chieftain basically does the same thing as Goblin Bushwhacker and Reckless Bushwhacker, just in a more permanent way. So essentially the idea behind this deck is that you want to spit out a lot of goblins, either with early 1-drops like Goblin Guide or Foundry Street Denizen or Legion Loyalist, and then go extra ride with goblin tokens using things like Dragon Fodder and Mog War Marshal, and then you want to pump them up with lords like Goblin Bushwhacker, Reckless Bushwhacker, Goblin Chieftain, and one of the less budget-friendly options I added to the deck, which is Atarka's Command. Atarka's Command gives you a lot more options in this deck. It gives you some reach, in that you can do an extra 3 damage to your opponent. And you can also add +1/+1 across the board with all of your creatures. And then I think the most important aspect of it is your opponent's unable to be gaining life. Especially after the first game, a lot of decks will bring in life gain to try to mitigate all of your hyper-aggressive attacking. And the Atarka's Command, your opponent's not being able to gain life, it can give you that one turn you need to, like, say, attack through a Wormcoil Engine to go for the win or something like that. So Atarka's Command is a really good addition to this deck, and it's kind of the reason that we've added green to the deck. Now, speaking of reach, we're also going to be running Goblin Grenade, which Goblin Grenade is one of those cards that is kind of contentious in 8-Whack. Not everybody runs it. I'm running a full play set of 4, but you'll notice that in a lot of my games, I will sideboard this card out to make room for other stuff. It's essentially 1 mana for 5 damage. It's sorcery speed. That's the first thing that really kind of hurts it. And of course, you have to sacrifice a goblin in order to do it. But a lot of times, when you're casting Goblin Grenade, you're either killing something that absolutely needs to die, something like Tasigur or Gurmag Angler or something like that, or you're just doing enough damage to kill your opponent, and then it doesn't matter how many goblins you have left on the field. In addition to Goblin Grenade, of course, we're running Lightning Bolt, because, I mean, who wants to run a mono red deck without Lightning Bolt? Lightning Bolt is just kind of like the model of efficiency. So, Lightning Bolt stays in almost all the time. The only times we really bring out Lightning Bolt is if we're playing something like Boggles or decks that don't have a lot of creatures. For the mana base, we are only running 18 lands. 4 of those lands are fetch lands, split between Bloodstained Mire and Wooded Foothills. That might seem like an unusual split, but we're not running any basic forest in this deck. So it doesn't really matter which fetch lands we use as long as they can fetch red, and running a split of Bloodstained Mire and Wooded Foothills kind of helps obfuscate what we're playing. A lot of times you can play a Bloodstained Mire down on turn 1 and not play a turn 1 play, and your opponent might think that you are on Jund or Death Shadow or something like that. So having a spread of different fetch lands kind of I don't know, helps keep the mystery alive, but usually after the first turn, your opponent knows exactly what you're playing. So having the Bloodstained Mires can sometimes have opponents like playing around things that aren't in your deck. Maybe like Fatal Pushes or something like that. For our green mana fixing, we've got a full play set of Copperlined Gorges, because really we don't need to be worried about lands coming into play tapped if it's after the 3rd land anyway. Because for the most part, by the time you are at turn 3 or turn 4, you've cast most of your hand anyway, and it doesn't really matter. Nothing in the deck costs more than 3, so Copperlined Gorge is almost like the perfect type of land for this deck. And then, of course, we have a couple of Stomping Grounds, which you can get with your fetch lands. We're also running 8 regular mountains, and that helps kind of mitigate any damage that you take on the backswing. If you're playing against another aggressive deck, running lots of extra basics helps protect you from having to worry about your life total getting too low. Now, on the sideboard, mono red decks are typically very restricted on their sideboard. You pretty mostly either put in extra removal spells, or you put in like some artifacts or something like that. But with adding green to the deck, that actually gives us a lot more options. We have a couple of Electrickeries. Electrickeries is kind of a one-sided board wipe, and that's to really help us against some of our harder matchups like Elves or even Affinity, because what it does is it lets us attack through other decks that are trying to go wide. Decks that just want to play one big creature, we can usually attack through. We can we can go wide enough that we're not really worried about one dude getting blocked. But if our opponent is spitting out just as many Elves as we're spitting out Goblins, trying to get an attack through is really, really difficult. So being able to just deal 1 damage to everything your opponent has is a good way to kind of clear the path. And again, for like Affinity, almost every creature in Affinity only has 1 toughness, so Electrickery is actually a really good option for that. And even in the turns where you're not really worried about killing a bunch of creatures, being able to deal 1 damage to a creature, it's not spectacular, but it's a play that sometimes occurs. Relic of Progenitus is our go-to graveyard hate spell, and there's not as many graveyard decks out there. Dredge is obviously not as popular as it used to be, but decks with say like Tarmogoyf or things like that, Relic is still a good card. Living End is obviously still a deck that you're going to see in rotation pretty frequently. So having some way to consistently deal with graveyards is really important. And we don't feel bad about having 4 of them in our sideboard because Relic replaces itself. You can draw a card off of it. So you're really not worried about... You never feel bad playing Relic of Progenitus because at the very least it always replaces itself. We have 2 more copies of Atarka's Command, and these are really, really good in the sideboard because if you're playing against a deck that you know that you're going to be seeing some life gain in the future, having those extra Atarka's Commands is really important. We're also running Destructive Revelry. There's a lot of green artifact and enchantment removal cards, and this is probably not only the most versatile at 2 mana, but it also deals some extra damage to our opponent. And when I say versatile at 2 mana, a lot of the times the card that you're bringing this in for is going to be Chalice of the Void. Chalice of the Void set on 1 basically wrecks our deck. And having a artifact removal spell at 2, which is a converted mana cost that you're typically not going to see Chalice of the Void set at, this lets us not only smash that Chalice of the Void and do a little bit of damage, and then also let us, continue playing Magic, because otherwise we kind of get blown out by that card. And the last card that I've added to this deck, and I've had a little bit of mixed success with, sorry, that's me talking and not being able to say words, is Kari Zev's Expertise. Now, Kari Zev's Expertise is basically Threaten. It's 3 mana, does the same thing as Threaten. It lets you untap a creature, or also in this case a vehicle, which I don't think I've ever done. It untaps it, it gains haste, and you get control of it. Threaten effects are really, really good in your Goblin decks because a lot of times your opponent is going to be ramping up to where they can build to something big that can sit in front of your team. Wormcoil Engine is a good option, even sometimes like Thragtusk. Just putting something big in front of your team is going to make it so you can't attack through successfully. And Kari Zev's is basically just 3 mana, kill your opponent. The reason that I like this over your traditional Threaten effect is that it lets you cast a spell that costs 2 or less after casting this card, which kind of gives you a lot of value. It's almost similar to Bloodbraid Elf or other cards that have Cascade. So I've been testing this out. It's been working just fine as a Threaten, but more often than not, what I end up casting the most with this is like a Lightning Bolt or a Goblin Grenade, and usually that's enough to finish the game. So we generally bring this in against decks like Tron or even Death Shadow. And that is basically the deck. Today we're going to be running through a 5-round Modern Friendly League. And we're going to see if we can go 5-0. If we can't go 5-0, hopefully we can go 0-5, right? Before we get started, I want to go ahead and let you know that if you enjoy this video, to please give us a thumbs up. And if you want to see more videos in the future, you can click on the subscribe button in YouTube, and that'll give you notifications letting you know when we come out with new videos. And lastly, obviously we don't do this for money, but it takes money to do it. We've got to have money to buy new cards and whatnot. And if you really like us and you want to support us, we do have a Patreon link in the description below. So feel free to click on that if that's the kind of thing that you're into. But with that being said, let's move on to the first round.